Benito Mussolini had a dream, a very specific toga and sandals themed dream, where Italy was once again the Roman Empire. The problem was, in the 1930s, all the good spots for an empire had already been taken. Britain and France had dibs on most of the planet. So Mussolini, desperate to join the cool kids club of colonial powers, looked at a map and found one of the few independent nations left in Africa, Ethiopia. Adding to the appeal was a lingering national embarrassment from 1896, when the Italians had tried this before and gotten spectacularly defeated at the Battle of Adwa. This wasn't just about building an empire, it was about avenging a wounded ego, which is always a fantastic reason for foreign policy. To start a proper war, you need a proper excuse. Or, if you're in a hurry, any excuse will do. In December 1934, at an oasis called Wal Wal on the disputed border between Ethiopia and Italian Somaliland, a skirmish broke out. Italy, having clearly provoked the incident, immediately claimed to be the deeply wronged victim and demanded an apology and a huge indemnity. Ethiopia, quite reasonably, suggested they take it to the League of Nations for arbitration. Mussolini responded to this calm, diplomatic proposal by shipping hundreds of thousands of soldiers and a metric ton of military hardware to East Africa. Negotiation tactics, you see. The official Italian line was that they were on a civilizing mission. Their version of civilization, however, came in canisters delivered from the sky. From the very start of the invasion in October 1935, the Italian Air Force began dropping mustard gas and other chemical agents on Ethiopian soldiers. And not just soldiers, they sprayed it on villages, farms, rivers, and Red Cross hospitals. The idea was to terrorize the population and make the land uninhabitable. Mustard gas is particularly nasty. It causes horrific blisters on the skin, in the lungs, everywhere. The Ethiopians, many of whom fought with spears and outdated rifles, had no defense against this. It wasn't a war. It was an extermination passed off as a colonial adventure. But the propaganda posters back home looked great. The world, specifically the League of Nations, watched all this happen and collectively issued a firm tut-tut. They condemned Italy's actions and imposed economic sanctions. It sounds impressive until you read the fine print. The sanctions conveniently failed to include steel, copper, and, most crucially, oil. You know, the things you actually need to run a war machine. Britain and France were so terrified of pushing Mussolini into an alliance with a certain German leader that they essentially gave him a green light. The Suez Canal, the main artery for Italian supplies, was kept wide open. It was like trying to stop a getaway driver by fining him for a broken taillight. While the world's diplomats were busy calculating the economic cost of morality, Ethiopia's emperor, Haile Selassie, went to Geneva in person. In June 1936, he stood before the League and delivered one of the most powerful speeches of the 20th century. He calmly and devastatingly laid out the facts of Italy's chemical warfare and the slaughter of his people. He warned them, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow." The Italian journalists in the gallery heckled and whistled so loudly they had to be removed. The assembly gave him a standing ovation. And then they went right back to doing absolutely nothing. Because applause costs nothing and principles are terribly expensive. By May 1936, Italian forces entered the capital, Addis Ababa, and Mussolini declared the birth of the new Roman Empire from his balcony in Rome. The war was officially over. For the Italians, anyway. For the Ethiopians, the occupation was just beginning, and it was going to be managed by a man named Rodolfo Graziani. Graziani had earned the nickname the Butcher of Fezzan for his gentle work in Libya, which included throwing people out of airplanes and setting up concentration camps. He was the perfect man for the job, if the job description was unimaginable cruelty. Fast forward to February 19, 1937. It's a day of celebration in Addis Ababa. Viceroy Graziani is hosting a public ceremony to celebrate the birth of an Italian prince, handing out alms to the poor. It was a classic PR move to show the beneficence of Italian rule. As Graziani stood on the steps of the palace, two Ethiopian resistance fighters, Abraha Deboch and Moges Asgedom, lobbed about 10 grenades into the crowd of Italian dignitaries. Graziani was severely wounded, but survived. Dozens of others weren't so lucky. The resistance had sent a message. The Italian response would be less of a message and more of a city-wide psychotic breakdown. What followed is known in Ethiopia as Yekatit 12, the 12th day of the month by their calendar. For 3 days, Italian soldiers, black-shirt militias, and even civilian colonists went on a rampage through Addis Ababa. Graziani, from his hospital bed, had given the order, "Exterminate them all." There was no investigation, no search for the guilty. Anyone Ethiopian was a target. They were shot, clubbed, stabbed, and burned alive in their homes. The marauding groups went through the city with gasoline and lists of educated Ethiopians, the intellectuals, the community leaders, to be systematically executed. This wasn't a reprisal. It was a decapitation strike against the very idea of an Ethiopian nation. Estimates suggest up to 30,000 people were murdered in just 72 hours. The violence wasn't limited to the capital. The perpetrators of the attack had briefly taken refuge at the ancient monastery of Debre Libanos, one of Ethiopia's holiest sites. They left, but that detail didn't matter to Graziani. Believing the monks were complicit, he ordered the entire monastery liquidated. In May 1937, Italian troops surrounded Debre Libanos. They executed every single monk, hermit, and deacon they could find. We're talking about hundreds of people. They even killed the young students at the monastery school. They then went after the sorcerers and soothsayers in the area, which was basically anyone with local influence who wasn't a monk. You have to appreciate the thoroughness of the barbarity. For all this brutality, Italy never truly controlled Ethiopia. Their empire was mostly just the main cities and the roads connecting them. The rest of the country was in a constant state of rebellion. The Ethiopian resistance, known as the Arbegnach, waged a relentless guerrilla war for years. This glorious new addition to the Roman Empire was actually a massive, expensive, and bloody quagmire. It drained Italy's resources and tied down 250,000 soldiers who could have been used elsewhere when World War II kicked off. The great prize turned out to be a booby prize, but Mussolini was too committed to the bit to ever admit it. When World War II ended, the world had bigger fish to fry. The Nuremberg trials focused on German atrocities, and Italian war crimes were quietly swept under the rug. Ethiopia submitted a list of war criminals they wanted to prosecute, with Graziani right at the top. But the Allies, particularly Britain, blocked their extradition, wanting to maintain stability in post-war Italy. Graziani was eventually tried in an Italian court, not for what he did in Africa, but for collaborating with the Germans. He got 19 years and was out in 4 months due to ill health. He lived until 1955, dying a wealthy man. It's a heartwarming story of how, if your crimes are inconvenient enough to the global power structure, you can literally get away with mass murder. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!